How much does it actually cost to buy a lifetime subscription to being a human ATM for a family that secretly looks down on you like you're a stray dog? I honestly didn't know the exact figure back then, but it turns out my personal subscription ended up costing me $60,000 in cold hard cash out of my business account. And that was with the special family discount applied, mind you. My name is Mark. I'm just a regular, everyday guy who grew up in a loud working-class neighborhood over on the east side, surrounded by the constant noise of circular saws, heavy diesel engines, and greasy socket wrenches. Nobody ever handed me a silver spoon, and I certainly wasn't sitting around waiting on some long-lost rich uncle to die and leave me a mountain of cash. I built my heating, ventilation, and air conditioning business from absolute rock bottom with my own two hands, a battered old Ford Econoline van, and a mountain of credit card debt. For 15 solid years, I worked 7 days a week, crawling under dark, moldy subfloors in 90-degree humidity, breathing in blown fiberglass insulation, and burning my hands on hot copper pipes. But by the time I hit my mid-30s, I had built something real. I owned a rock-solid company with 6 crews on the road, a brilliant reputation across the county, and a fully paid-off 4-bedroom house sitting on a crisp 2-acre lot in a quiet high-end suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio. 0 mortgages, 0 bank loans holding me by the throat. Just honest work, a comfortable life, and the peace of mind that comes with knowing you earned every single brick under your feet. Then, of course, came my wife, Sarah. Sarah worked part-time at a high-end local art gallery downtown. To be completely transparent with you guys, she made just about enough money in a month to cover her daily $20 organic iced coffees, 2 gluten-free almond croissants, and maybe a couple of those outrageously expensive glossy architecture magazines. But the way she carried herself, you would have sworn her great-grandfather personally founded the British Empire, and she was just doing the mortal world a massive charitable favor by walking on the same pavement as the rest of us. She was constantly dropping these little passive-aggressive comments about how I was too grounded, how my speech was a bit too crude, or how I lacked any real appreciation for the finer, more delicate things in life. Guys, leave a comment down below if your wife was ever deeply embarrassed by your calloused hands and dirty work boots at a dinner party, but somehow managed to be endlessly proud of your grounded signature on the bottom of a $20,000 bank check? Because that was my exact life for 6 straight years, but I kept my mouth shut. I hated petty drama. I genuinely loved her, and like a total naive idiot, I convinced myself it was just harmless, quirky snobbery that didn't really hurt anyone. Everything was running relatively smooth in our marriage until about 2 years ago, when a total financial apocalypse hit her supposedly noble bloodline. Her younger brother, Brad, a 32-year-old former failed real estate agent and professional leech who had spent his entire adult life playing the role of a hotshot Wall Street corporate wolf, got himself tangled up in another shady cryptocurrency scheme and a series of fake land development deals. Long story short, Brad lost a mountain of money that wasn't his, and suddenly he owed some very serious, very unpolite guys a massive sum of cash with a tight deadline. And as soon as Brad realized his shiny leased BMW was about to get repossessed and his kneecaps were in actual physical danger, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, magically materialized on our front doorstep with 3 mountain-sized suitcases. Eleanor was a 71-year-old family matriarch with a severe case of unearned grandeur who politely requested to move into our guest suite just temporarily so we could help nurse her back to health following a routine hip replacement surgery. Guys, that temporary stay stretched into 8 agonizing, endless months of pure misery. She practically took over the entire ground floor of my home. She ate my prime ribeye steaks, drank my top-shelf small-batch bourbon when she thought I wasn't looking, and sat at my hand-carved oak dining table every single evening, lecturing me on how to properly hold a silver fish fork and how a man of true status should properly dress for Sunday brunch. Sarah would just pull those giant, teary-eyed Shrek cat eyes, squeeze my forearm until it bruised, and whisper in my ear, "Honey, please just bear with her. Mom had a major medical operation, and Brad is my only brother. We are a family, Mark, and family has to show mercy when someone is going through a dark valley." So I showed mercy. I swallowed my pride, ate their passive-aggressive insults alongside my dinner, and quietly endured their insufferable family circus every single day, praying to God above that they would eventually pack up their designer luggage and let me take a single peaceful breath in my own damn house. Then, about 2 months ago, the real financial magic trick blew wide open. My longtime company accountant, a sharp old guy named Dave who had handled my business books since the day I registered my LLC, went down with a brutal case of pneumonia and ended up stuck in the ICU for weeks. Quarterly tax filing deadlines were fast approaching. Vendors needed to be paid, and business doesn't just freeze because someone falls ill. So I dragged myself into my office on a Sunday afternoon, booted up the main financial software, opened up my company's primary checking account statements for the past 18 months, and almost choked on my lukewarm gas station coffee. Every single month, like clockwork on the 15th, anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 had been quietly transferred out of my business account into an unknown domestic account. On line after line, month after month, the official transaction ledger described these wire transfers as specialized external accounting and structural consultation fees. My blood pressure instantly spiked. I dug straight into the encrypted digital paper trail, pulled up the signed vendor service contracts, and felt an ice-cold bucket of water dump over my head. It turned out that Sarah, working completely behind my back with a junior assistant bookkeeper that her brother Brad had lovingly recommended to my firm a year ago, had been forging my electronic signature on corporate withdrawal authorizations. For a year and a half, they had been systematically siphoning out a grand total of $60,000. And where did every single penny of that cash go? Straight into a shell account created to cover Brad's massive gambling debts and keep those muscle-bound loan sharks from turning his face into meatloaf. My vision went blurry. My hands started shaking so hard I could barely hold my coffee mug, and the veins in my neck felt like they were going to pop. I printed out every single bank ledger, highlighted every forged signature in neon yellow, and walked straight into the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the island in a silk robe, calmly sipping her organic green tea and casually flipping through a high-end French country kitchen catalog. I slammed that heavy stack of paper down on the granite countertop right over her magazine with a thud that shook the bar stools. "Sarah, do me a huge favor and explain this to me real quick," I said, my voice dangerously low, vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. "Since when did my HVAC firm become a non-profit charity fund for your deadbeat brother? Where's the $60,000 you stole out of my corporate account?" Instead of turning pale, bursting into tears, or showing even a microscopic grain of remorse, Sarah's eyes flared up with pure venom. She slammed her porcelain teacup down so hard tea splashed all over her silk robe, stood up, shoved her chair back, and started screeching at the absolute top of her lungs like a wounded animal. "You are a cold-hearted, tight-fisted, disgusting little miser," Sarah shrieked, her face turning bright red. "Brad was in literal danger. Do you care more about numbers on a screen than my own brother's life? You sit on your pile of money while my family suffers. You only care about your dirty pipes, your rusted metal sheets, and your stupid blue-collar job. Family sticks together and protects each other, Mark. You owed him that help, and you should be ashamed of yourself for making a big deal out of a few $1,000. Get that insane logic, guys. I am out there crawling under house foundations, getting filthy and taking beatings in the sweltering heat for 12 hours a day to build a life, while she and her pathetic family quietly rob me, blind from the comfort of my own kitchen. And somehow I'm the selfish, cold-hearted monster because I noticed my life savings were missing. Brothers, listen to me closely. $60,000 was just the mild opening act of this nightmare. If I had known back then that those 3 parasitic snakes had already cooked up a disgusting, calculated plan to frame me as a violent lunatic, call the cops on me, and legally kick me out of my own paid-off home, I would have burned their entire little operation down right then and there. Make sure you stick around for the part with the hidden security cameras. What my Nest system ended up capturing in crystal-clear 4K audio and video made the senior police deputy literally drop his coffee mug flat onto the hardwood floor. But first, let me tell you about the absolute worst backyard barbecue in human history. A week after that explosive shouting match on the kitchen floor, Eleanor's 70th birthday rolled around. Despite the fact that Sarah and I weren't even speaking, and the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a drywall knife, Sarah decided she was going to throw a massive, lavish milestone celebration right in my backyard. She sent out gilded invitations to about 30 guests, the absolute elite snobs of the local Columbus art scene. We're talking gallery owners, pretentious interior decorators, neighbors who walk their pampered little poodles in matching cashmere sweaters, and Brad's fake businessman buddies wearing cheap, shiny three-piece suits. And who do you think paid for the giant white party tents on the lawn, the high-end catering staff, the prime cuts of ribeye steak, and the endless cases of imported French wine? You guessed it, yours truly. But instead of being allowed to sit back as the owner of the house and enjoy my weekend, I spent the entire afternoon standing over a blazing 6-burner gas grill in 95-degree humidity, sweating straight through a stained apron like a minimum wage line cook working a double shift. I was walking back and forth through the yard, utterly exhausted, sweat stinging my eyes, serving hot trays of steak while these self-proclaimed upper-crust aristocrats looked down their noses at me like I was a homeless guy who had accidentally wandered onto their royal estate. The ultimate slap in the face was listening to my mother-in-law, Eleanor, holding court near the fountain with a glass of $80 champagne, whispering to a circle of guests loud enough for half the yard to hear. "Oh yes, that's my daughter's husband, Mark. A simple laborer, of course. No college degree, very basic background, but we are a forgiving Christian family, so we do our best to accept him for who he is." I stood by that roaring grill, squeezing my steel barbecue tongs until my knuckles turned ghost white, grinding my back teeth together, thinking to myself, "Oh yeah, you accept me all right. You especially love accepting my hard-earned checks to pay off your useless son's debt." But I held my breath, kept my mouth shut, and waited for the right moment to strike back. Around 7:30 that evening, while I was flipping the last batch of prime ribeyes and daydreaming about chucking every single one of those snobs over my cedar fence, a heavy, greasy arm flopped right over my shoulders. I turned my head, and there was Brad. He was already completely loaded on my $50 small batch bourbon, smelling like cheap cologne, stale sweat, and bad decisions, leaning his full weight on me with a slick, greasy salesman grin slapped across his face. "Marky boy, my absolute guy," Brad slurped, slapping my shoulder so hard I nearly dropped a $30 steak into the dirt. "Look at you, man, grilling up a storm for the high society. Listen, bro, I wanted to pull you aside for a quick sec. Real business talk, man to man, entrepreneur to entrepreneur." I slid his greasy arm off my shoulder, turned down the gas valve on the grill, and stared straight into his bloodshot, glassy eyes. "I'm all ears, Brad. What kind of revolutionary business move are we talking about this time?" Brad leaned in uncomfortably close, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper like he was handing me top-secret government codes. "All right, check it out. I'm launching this massive new commercial real estate project downtown. Mind-blowing profit margins, zero risk, total slam dunk. But the bank is being a total pain in the ass with their underwriting paperwork. I just need a solid co-signer for a tiny $150,000 line of credit. Just a total formality, bro. For an HVAC king like you with a paid-off estate, 150 grand is loose couch cushion change. We signed the papers Monday morning and we're both rolling in luxury by Christmas." I took a deep, slow breath, pulled a clean white cotton towel off my apron hook, and deliberately wiped my hands, staring at him without blinking. I didn't yell, I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled, looked him up and down and said, "Brad, I wouldn't co-sign a piece of toilet paper for you. Not for 150 grand, not for a single dime. In fact, I am officially done funding your pathetic lifestyle. And just so we're completely on the same page, I know every detail about the $60,000 you and my wife quietly stole out of my business account." Brad's jaw dropped so fast I thought his chin was going to hit the patio bricks. The fake, drunken color drained straight out of his face, leaving him looking like a corpse in a cheap linen jacket. He opened his mouth, closed it, stumbled backward over a lawn chair, and then his panic instantly flipped into pure, ugly rage. "You cheap, uncultured piece of trash!" Brad screamed at the top of his lungs, completely forgetting about the 30 high society guests standing 10 feet away with their champagne glasses. "You think you're better than us because you fix dirty air conditioners for a living? You owe this family!" Before I could even open my mouth, Eleanor came gliding across the lawn like an angry, venomous swan, her diamond necklace flashing in the sunset. She grabbed the wireless microphone right out of the hands of the acoustic guitarist Sarah had hired for background music, flipped the switch on, and cranked the portable speaker system to maximum volume. A deafening, high-pitched feedback squeal blasted through the entire neighborhood, making everyone cover their ears in shock. "Attention, everyone!" Eleanor's voice boomed through the speakers, sharp, shrill, and dripping with raw hatred. "I want you all to take a good look at this man. Mark is the single biggest mistake our bloodline has ever made. He is nothing more than a glorified plumber with a bank account, a crude, uncultured peasant who has zero concept of nobility, zero respect for family honor, and zero dignity. He sits on his pile of dirty money while my brilliant son suffers." Right on cue, Sarah came sprinting across the grass, her designer dress fluttering, tears magically welling up in her eyes like she was auditioning for a Hollywood drama. She stood right beside her mother, pointed a manicured finger straight at my face, and shrieked so loud her voice cracked. "You were never a real part of this family, Mark. You never belonged here. You're just a glorified utility bill with a heartbeat, a useful little cash register attached to this house." Leave a comment right now, fellas. What would you do if your own wife and her family tried to publicly humiliate you in your own backyard, on a property you paid off with your own sweat and blood? Any normal guy would have snapped on the spot. My blood was boiling, my knuckles were white, and every muscle in my body wanted to tear that sound system apart. But then I remembered something crucial. Back in my college years, I spent 4 solid years doing competitive Greco-Roman wrestling. I knew exactly how to handle dead weight, and more importantly, I realized it was time to shut down this pathetic aristocratic theater once and for all. The wildest fight of the evening was about to kick off. I didn't yell back. I walked right over to the main power strip by the gazebo, reached down, and yanked the master extension cord out of the outlet. The microphone died instantly, mid-screech. "All right, ladies and gentlemen of the high and mighty elite," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dead silence. "The show is officially over. Party's canceled. Pack up your designer bags, get off my private property, and get out before I start throwing people over the fence." Brad went completely insane. He let out a primal roar, charged across the grass like a rabid animal, and shoved me hard in the chest. But his balance was completely shot from the bourbon. As he lunged, his arm caught the edge of the prep table, knocking a massive glass bowl of scalding hot barbecue marinade off the counter. The thick, sticky sauce splashed all over my chest and arms, burning like hellfire. I didn't even flinch. As Brad swung a wild, drunken right hook at my face, I stepped inside his reach, executed a clean, effortless sweep, and dumped his legs right out from under him. Our resident Wall Street genius hit the manicured grass with a heavy, wind-knocking thud that shook the yard ornaments. Before I could step back, sharp acrylic nails dug straight into the side of my neck and cheek. Eleanor had charged me from behind, screaming like a lunatic, clawing at my face. I grabbed her wrists, trying to pry her off without hurting an old woman, when I heard Sarah scream behind me. Sarah had grabbed a heavy 2-gallon glass pitcher filled with ice-cold lemonade from the main table. She raised it with both hands and threw it straight at my head with everything she had. The heavy glass pitcher caught me square on the point of my left shoulder, shattering into 100 sharp shards with an exploding splash. Sticky lemonade, crushed ice, slices of lemon, and broken glass showered all over the patio tiles. I stumbled sideways, my shirt completely drenched in iced tea and sweet juice, blood trickling down my cheek from Eleanor's claws, and the entire backyard erupted into total, unadulterated madness. Guests were screeching at the top of their lungs, knocking over metal folding chairs, stepping over each other and sprinting toward the side gate like a pack of scared animals trying to escape a disaster zone. Sarah didn't even check on me to see if I had glass stuck in my skin. She didn't check on her brother, who was still flat on his back in the turf, wheezing and holding his ribs like a landed fish. Instead, she whipped out her iPhone with trembling, sauce-stained fingers, pounded emergency services on speakerphone, and began wailing into the receiver in a desperate, hyperventilating sob that could have tricked a seasoned hostage negotiator. "Emergency! Please, oh God, send the police immediately! My husband has gone completely insane. He's drunk out of his mind, he's destroying the whole house, and he just viciously attacked my elderly mother and my helpless brother. Please hurry, he's going to murder us all." Within 6 short minutes, the calm suburban night sky was flashing blinding red and blue lights as 3 marked county patrol cruisers came screaming down our peaceful street, tires squealing to a halt right on my front lawn. 4 uniformed officers slammed their heavy doors, unholstered their tactical flashlights, and came marching through the side gate with their hands resting on their sidearms, taking in the scene. And man, what a glorious masterpiece of bad acting it was. Brad was still sprawled across the grass, groaning like he'd been run over by an 18-wheeler on the interstate. Eleanor was slumped dramatically in a wicker patio chair, clutching her chest with both hands, gasping for air like she was taking her final breath on planet Earth. And Sarah was down on her knees in the middle of the ruined, lemonade-soaked lawn, her hair wildly disheveled, crying torrents of fake tears into her hands. "Officer, thank God you made it!" Sarah shrieked, scrambling up and pointing a trembling, dirty finger directly at my chest. "Arrest him! Take him away! He drank half a bottle of heavy whiskey, flew into an unprovoked violent rage, and beat up my poor mother. Look at my brother. He can barely breathe. He told us he was going to burn this entire house down with us trapped inside." I just stood there next to the smoking grill, using the corner of my ruined, marinade-soaked apron to carefully wipe a mix of sticky lemonade and fresh blood off my jawline. I looked down at my shirt, dripping with barbecue sauce and crushed ice, and then I turned my eyes toward the lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered deputy with silver hair, a weathered face, and an intensely stern, no-nonsense glare locked straight on me. "All right, buddy, keep your hands wide where I can see them," the deputy commanded in a deep, authoritative voice, unclipping the thumb brake on his leather holster as he stepped forward. "Don't make a single sudden movement. We are going to do this nice and slow." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just slowly raised both of my open hands up to shoulder height, looked the lead deputy square in the eyes, and kept my tone as steady as a concrete pillar. "Deputy, I'm completely calm," I said, nodding my head up toward the white wooden trim of the house roofline. "Before you put those steel cuffs on me and start taking their statements down as gospel, do me a quick, massive favor. Take a look, right up under the porch overhang. See those 3 black dome units? Those are Nest 4K, smart security cameras. I installed them last week. They record wide-angle, high-definition video, crisp audio, and stream directly to a secure cloud server in real time." The lead deputy paused mid-step. He tilted his silver head back, squinted up at the eaves, and spotted the small green recording LEDs glowing softly in the twilight. He looked back down at me, then slowly glanced over at Sarah, whose dramatic, shuddering sobs instantly froze in her throat like someone had flipped a light switch. "Let's step inside the cool air of the kitchen, officer," I said quietly. "I'll pull up the main dashboard on my tablet, and we can all enjoy the full feature-length movie together." We walked inside through the sliding glass doors, leaving the 3 actors waiting out on the lawn in complete, awkward silence. I picked up my iPad off the kitchen island, logged into the Nest app with my thumbprint, and handed the bright screen straight over to the lead deputy and his partner. They leaned over the counter, tapped the screen, and hit play on the unedited timeline from the last 2 hours. The officers watched the tablet in complete, stone-faced silence, occasionally shaking their heads as the crystal-clear 4K video played back with the crisp, directional audio that picked up every single whisper. First, the video showed Brad marching over to the grill, shoving me aggressively, and knocking the bowl of boiling marinade all over my hands. It showed my clean, defensive leg sweep that put him flat on his back without a single punch thrown. Second, it captured Eleanor sprinting up from behind like a wild animal, screaming vile curses and raking her long acrylic fingernails down the side of my neck while I desperately held her wrists away from my eyes. Third, it captured Sarah, grabbing that 2-gallon glass pitcher with both hands and hurling it like a missile straight at my head from 5 feet away. But the absolute golden jackpot, the piece of evidence that made the lead deputy literally drop his paper coffee cup onto the floor, was recorded an hour before the party even started. The gazebo camera had captured Sarah, Eleanor, and Brad standing in a tight circle by the back fence, whispering. The audio picked up Brad saying word for word, "Once the guests are here, we'll push his buttons until he snaps. As soon as he raises his voice, call emergency services, lie to the cops, get an emergency protective order, and change the locks while he's sitting in a holding cell." The silver-haired lead deputy let out a slow, heavy breath, tapped the iPad screen to pause the video, and turned his head to look at his partner. The second officer just rubbed his jaw, slowly shaking his head in absolute, complete disbelief. "Well," the deputy said, his voice dropping into a cold, hard tone as he unclipped his steel handcuffs with a sharp, metallic clack. "That is about as open and shut as a case gets. Unbelievable." The deputy turned around, shoved open the sliding glass door, and marched back out onto the wooden deck, his heavy tactical boots thumping loudly against the planks. The smug, triumphant grins that had returned to the faces of Brad, Sarah, and Eleanor instantly dissolved into raw, unadulterated terror as the officer walked straight past me, grabbed Brad by the lapels of his wrinkled linen suit jacket, yanked him roughly off the grass, and spun him around, snapping the steel cuffs onto his wrists. "Brad Miller, you are officially under arrest for felony assault, criminal destruction of private property, and filing a false emergency police report," the deputy announced loudly, his voice echoing across the quiet suburban neighborhood. "What? No! Are you out of your mind?" Sarah shrieked, jumping off her knees, her voice cracking into pure, unfiltered panic. "He is the victim here. My husband is the one who attacked us. Look at my elderly mother. Look at my poor brother. Ma'am, you need to close your mouth right now before I throw you in the back of the cruiser alongside him," the deputy barked back, pulling a small black notepad out of his shirt pocket. "We just finished watching the entire high-definition video recording from your husband's security system inside. We listened to your little meeting by the gazebo where you plotted this whole thing out. We saw your brother attack him first at the grill. We saw your mother claw his face, and we saw you hurl a heavy glass pitcher directly at his head. You and your mother are both receiving formal court summonses for domestic battery, conspiracy, and filing a fraudulent police report. If you say one more word, you're spending the entire weekend in a holding cell." You should have seen the look on their faces, brothers. The color drained out of them so fast, they looked like 3 beige white bedsheets hanging on a clothesline in the wind. Brad was stuffed into the back of the patrol car, screaming profanities at the top of his lungs, while Sarah and Eleanor stood frozen on the ruined, lemonade-soaked lawn, clutching each other in absolute, utterly public humiliation as every single neighbor on the block watched the entire scene play out from their front porches. The very next morning, while Sarah was frantically running around town trying to scrape together bail money for her useless brother and sleeping on a cramped sofa at her mother's tiny apartment, my corporate attorney dropped the real nuclear hammer on them. He pulled up the original property deeds and land registry records. I had bought my house 2 full years before I even met Sarah, using the proceeds from the sale of my late father's old rural farm property. Under Ohio state law, that house was classified as separate, non-marital property. It belonged to me, and me alone. 0% of it was hers. Bright and early at 7 on Monday morning, I hired a commercial locksmith to rekey every single lock on the front, back, side, and garage doors, and hired a private security vehicle to park right in my driveway. Then, two of my HVAC crew guys came over with a stack of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags. We packed up every single piece of Sarah and Eleanor's expensive designer clothing, high-end shoes, makeup sets, and useless art history books, carried them out to the curb, and stacked them right next to the garbage cans, just as a heavy, dark summer downpour started soaking the entire street. Do you guys think I just threw their trash bags out in the pouring rain, locked the doors, and called it a day? Not a chance in hell. The absolute sweetest, most satisfying part of any story is watching parasitic people pay back every single penny they stole, right down to the last red cent. Wait until you hear what my successful brother-in-law had to endure just to keep his pathetic skin out of a state penitentiary for the next 8 years. My corporate attorney didn't just file a simple civil suit, he went nuclear. We filed formal criminal fraud charges, corporate theft, grand larceny, and electronic signature forgery against both Brad and my former assistant bookkeeper. When the county prosecutor laid out the cold, hard evidence, including the digital paper trail and signed bank affidavits, Brad's legal team realized he was staring down the barrel of a 6 to 8 year sentence in a medium-security state prison. Faced with the terrifying prospect of trading his tailored suits for an orange jumpsuit, our resident Wall Street wolf folded like a cheap cardboard box. He had to liquidate his remaining cryptocurrency holdings, put his beloved luxury car up for an emergency cash sale, and take out a massive, predatory high-interest loan secured against his mother's remaining retirement savings just to cough up every single dime of that stolen $60,000 straight back into my business account. On top of that, he had to cover every single penny of my accumulated legal fees. When our divorce trial finally went before a judge 6 months later, it was an absolute massacre. The family court judge took one look at the Nest camera footage, reviewed the financial theft records, and dismissed Sarah's absurd demands for temporary spousal support, alimony, and half my business assets straight into the court trash can. To make the victory even sweeter, a neighbor across the street had filmed Brad's screaming arrest on his phone and posted the unedited video to a local Columbus community Facebook group. Overnight, Brad, Sarah, and Eleanor became the absolute laughingstock of the entire suburban area. A full year has passed since that chaotic, lemonade-soaked evening in my backyard, and my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My HVAC business is booming like never before. We just closed on a lease for a second commercial warehouse on the north side of the city to keep up with regional demand. I spent the winter completely remodeling my house from the ground up, kicking out every last piece of delicate, useless art junk Sarah brought in. I installed deep leather sofas, built a custom stone fireplace, and mounted an 85-inch television on the main wall where her pretentious gallery prints used to hang. And just last month, I took 2 full weeks off, packed my bags, and flew up to Alaska for a bucket-list salmon and deep-sea halibut fishing expedition with my closest childhood buddies. Right now, as I speak to you guys, it's a calm, cool Friday evening on my quiet back patio. The lawn is pristine, green, and quiet. A thick prime ribeye steak is sizzling away on the grill, sending a trail of mesquite smoke into the dusk. And I'm sitting back in a heavy cedar armchair holding a double tumbler of small-batch bourbon over fresh ice. Sarah and her mother are currently sharing a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy, run-down complex on the far edge of town, while Brad is grinding through double shifts at a third-party call center just to make his monthly debt payments. My neighbor next door leans his arms over the cedar fence, waves a hand, and calls out, "Hey, Mark! How are you holding up after all that wild family drama last summer?" I take a slow, satisfying sip of my cold bourbon, look up at the clear evening sky, smile from ear to ear, and call back, "Never felt better in my entire life, brother." Because cutting out toxic parasites, protecting your home, and keeping your self-respect is the single greatest win a man can ever ask for. That's my story, fellas. Stand your ground. Never ignore the red flags no matter how much you love someone, and never, ever let anyone turn you into a free ATM. The silver-haired lead deputy let out a slow, heavy, exasperated breath, tapped the iPad screen with his thumb to pause the video playback, and slowly turned his head to look directly at his partner. The second officer just stood there in the quiet kitchen, rubbing his jaw, slowly shaking his head in absolute, complete disbelief at what he had just witnessed on the high-definition monitor. "Well," the lead deputy said, his voice dropping into a cold, hard, razor-sharp tone as he reached down to his duty belt and unclipped his heavy steel handcuffs with a sharp metallic clack. "That is about as open and shut as a case gets. Absolutely unbelievable." The deputy turned around on his heel, shoved open the heavy glass sliding door, and marched back out onto the wooden deck, his heavy tactical boots thumping loudly against the cedar planks. The smug, triumphant grins that had briefly returned to the faces of Brad, Sarah, and Eleanor out on the lawn instantly dissolved into raw, unadulterated terror as the senior officer walked straight past me, grabbed Brad by the lapels of his wrinkled linen suit jacket, yanked him roughly up off the grass, and spun him around, aggressively snapping the steel cuffs onto his hairy wrist. "Brad Miller, you are officially under arrest for felony assault, criminal destruction of private property, and filing a false emergency police report," the deputy announced in a loud, stern voice that echoed across the quiet suburban neighborhood. "What? No! Are you out of your complete mind?" Sarah shrieked, jumping off her knees on the ruined grass, her voice cracking into pure, unfiltered panic and confusion. "He is the victim here. My husband is the one who attacked us. Look at my elderly mother. Look at my poor brother. He's bleeding. Ma'am, you need to close your mouth right now before I throw you in the back of the patrol cruiser alongside him," the deputy barked back, pulling a small black notepad and pen out of his front shirt pocket. "We just finished watching the entire high-definition 4K video recording from your husband's security system inside the house. We listened to your little secret meeting by the gazebo where you explicitly plotted this whole setup out. We saw your brother attack him first at the grill. We saw your mother claw his face, and we saw you hurl a heavy glass pitcher directly at his head from 5 feet away. You and your mother are both receiving formal court summons for domestic battery, conspiracy, and filing a fraudulent emergency police report. If you say one more single word, you're spending the entire weekend in a concrete holding cell." You should have seen the look on their pale faces, brothers. The color drained out of all three of them so fast they looked like 3 fresh white bedsheets hanging on a clothesline in a hurricane. Brad was shoved unceremoniously into the back seat of the patrol car, screaming vile profanities at the top of his lungs, while Sarah and Eleanor stood frozen on the ruined, lemonade-soaked lawn, clutching each other in absolute, utterly public humiliation as every single neighbor on the entire block watched the entire scene play out from their front porches. The patrol cars finally pulled away into the dark night, their red and blue strobes fading down the street, leaving behind a completely wrecked backyard, scattered plastic chairs, shattered glass on the patio, and an empty house that suddenly felt 10 times bigger than it did 3 hours ago. I walked back inside, shut the sliding glass door, locked it tight, and stood in the quiet kitchen. My face was still stinging from Eleanor's claws. My shirt was ruined with sticky, sweet lemonade and barbecue sauce, and my shoulder was throbbing where the heavy pitcher had hit me. But for the first time in 6 years, as I looked around at the pristine quartz countertops and clean floors, I felt a massive, invisible weight drop off my chest. The air in my own house finally felt clean. I walked over to the bathroom, flipped on the bright overhead lights, and looked at myself in the mirror. I had 2 long red claw marks running down my cheek, a dark bruise forming on my shoulder, and sauce stains all down my chest. I looked like a guy who had just survived a bar brawl, but when I looked into my own eyes, I didn't see defeat. I saw clarity. Pure, cold, crystal clear clarity. I washed my face with cold water, cleaned the cuts with rubbing alcohol, threw my ruined clothes straight into the trash can, and put on a fresh, clean cotton t-shirt. I poured myself a fresh glass of bourbon, walked back out onto the quiet, empty deck, and looked at the dark lawn. The party tents were still standing, white and silent under the yard lights, like ghost structures left behind after a circus pulled out of town. I took a slow sip of the whiskey, let the heat burn down my throat, and realized that the physical fight on the lawn was over, but the real war, the legal and financial war, was just getting started. And I was going to make damn sure I didn't lose a single inch of ground. Early the next morning, right as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, my phone started buzzing off the nightstand like a jackhammer. It was Sarah. She had tried calling me 27 times between 3 and 6 in the morning, leaving a trail of hysterical text messages that went from screaming threats about calling the district attorney to pathetic, desperate sob stories about how Brad was shivering in a cold holding cell down at the county jail. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't type a single reply. I simply picked up my mug of black coffee, sat down at my desk, and dialed my corporate attorney, a razor-sharp guy named Jim who had been handling my business contracts for over a decade. Jim listened to the whole breakdown without interrupting me once. When I told him about the Nest 4K security footage, the forged signatures on the business account, and the $60,000 that had vanished into thin air, I could practically hear him smiling through the receiver. He told me to stay put, keep my mouth shut, and meet him at his office downtown at 9 sharp with my iPad and every financial document I could print out. By 9:15, we were sitting in Jim's conference room, surrounded by glass walls overlooking the city skyline. Jim reviewed the forged electronic signature sheets side by side with my actual signature, played the video clip of the gazebo conspiracy twice, and leaned back in his leather chair, tapping his pen against his chin. "Mark, my friend," Jim said, his voice as calm and calculated as a high-stakes poker player. "They didn't just dig themselves a hole yesterday, they dug a Grand Canyon and jumped into it head first with no parachute. You hold every single card in this deck. We are going to hit them with everything the legal system allows, and we are going to do it before they even realize what hit them." While Sarah was frantically driving around town, trying to find a bail bondsman who would take her mother's weak collateral to get Brad out of jail, Jim was already filing emergency motions at the county courthouse. First on the list was pulling the original property deeds and land registry records from my house. I had purchased my home 2 full years before I ever laid eyes on Sarah, using the entire cash inheritance I received from the sale of my late father's old rural farm property down in southern Ohio, under Ohio state law, because the home was acquired prior to the marriage and maintained strictly with non-marital funds without adding her name to the title. It was classified as separate non-marital property. It belonged to me, and me alone. 0% of the bricks, the land, or the equity belonged to Sarah or her family. By 2 o'clock that same afternoon, Jim had secured an emergency temporary protection order based on the battery charges and the video evidence of Sarah hurling a glass projectile at my head. Armed with that legal court order and a signed eviction notice, I called a local commercial locksmith company and had 3 vans pull up to my driveway at 4 o'clock sharp. Within 2 hours, every single lock on the front door, the back sliding deck, the side garage entry, and even the basement windows were completely drilled out, replaced, and rekeyed with high-security deadbolts. I changed the master code on the automatic garage door openers, revoked their access to the smart home app, and hired a uniformed private security firm to park a blacked-out SUV directly in my driveway 24 hours a day to enforce the protective order. Then, I called up 2 of my lead HVAC installation crew guys, big, burly fellows named Big John and Dave, who had worked alongside me in the trenches for years. They showed up in a heavy work truck equipped with a massive roll of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags and a pair of thick work gloves. "All right, boys," I said, pointing toward the master bedroom closet and the guest suite on the ground floor. "Bury every single piece of designer clothing, every pair of overpriced shoes, every bottle of perfume, every piece of jewelry, and every single art book that belongs to Sarah or her mother goes straight into these bags. We aren't keeping a single thread that belongs to them in this house. We spent 4 hours clearing out the entire estate. We didn't break anything, we didn't vandalize a single item, but we were completely ruthless with our efficiency. Every single silk dress, every pair of Italian leather heels, every vanity mirror, and every single piece of expensive makeup was carefully packed into contractor bags, carried out to the edge of the driveway, and stacked neatly right beside the plastic garbage bins by the curb. And just as we dropped the last black bag onto the grass near the curb, the dark summer clouds opened up above us, and a heavy, soaking Midwest downpour began drenching the entire street in a relentless curtain of water. Right on cue, as the rain was pouring down in sheets, a beat-up silver sedan came splashing down the street, slamming its brakes right in front of my driveway. The passenger door flew open, and Sarah stepped out, wearing a faded tracksuit, her hair messy, looking like she hadn't slept a single second in 24 hours. She took 3 steps toward the front door before she froze dead in her tracks, staring in complete, utter horror at the long line of 40 black contractor trash bags sitting out by the curb, getting drenched under the torrential downpour. She looked at the trash bags, then looked up at the driveway, where a burly, uniformed private security guard was sitting inside a black SUV with his emergency lights flashing slowly. Sarah sprinted over to the bags, ripping one open, her face twisting in pure panic as she realized her precious $300 silk blouses and designer leather purses were soaking in rainwater and mud. "Mark!" Sarah shrieked at the top of her lungs, stepping onto the edge of the lawn, her soaked clothes clinging to her as she screamed toward the house. "You sick, psychotic bastard! What did you do to my stuff? You can't do this! This is my house! I live here! I'm calling the cops!" The security guard rolled down his window, leaned his elbow out, and held up a laminated sheet of paper for her to see through the rain. "Ma'am, you need to step back onto the public sidewalk right now," the guard said in a sample, booming voice. "I have a signed court order of protection right here. Your husband is the sole property owner. You have been legally served with an emergency eviction notice, and if your feet touch this lawn again, I am calling the county sheriff to pick you up for trespassing." Sarah stood there in the pouring rain, her mouth opening and closing like a landed trout, water dripping off her nose, completely unable to process the reality crashing down on her head. The woman who had spent 6 years looking down her nose at me, treating me like a glorified handyman who was lucky to share her air, was standing on the curb in a soaked tracksuit, staring at her life packed into trash bags on garbage day. She let out a frustrated, hysterical scream, kicked one of the bags into the gutter, scrambled back into the sedan, and sped off into the rain. I stood behind the living room blinds with a quiet cup of coffee, watched the taillights disappear around the corner, and took a long, peaceful breath. The trash had officially been taken out. Now, if you guys think I just threw their bags out in the rain, locked my doors, and called it a day, you don't know me at all. The absolute sweetest, most glorious part of any story isn't just getting the bad guys out of your house. It's watching them pay back every single penny they stole from you, right down to the very last cent. Wait until you hear what my successful hotshot brother-in-law had to go through just to keep his pathetic skin from rotting inside a state penitentiary for the next decade. 3 days after the backyard disaster, my corporate attorney Jim and I took the business bank statements, the digital paper trail, and the forged electronic signature sheets straight to the county prosecutor's office. When the prosecutor looked over the cold, hard financial evidence, showing $60,000 systematically transferred from my corporate account straight into Brad's shell company, he didn't just see a family dispute. He saw textbook grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and identity theft. Within 48 hours, formal criminal indictments were issued for both Brad and my former assistant bookkeeper. When Brad's defense attorney sat him down in a glass room at the courthouse and explained that he was staring down the barrel of a 6 to 8 year sentence in a medium-security state prison with mandatory restitution, our resident Wall Street wolf completely broke down and wept like a toddler. Faced with the terrifying prospect of trading his tailored suits and country club fantasies for a gray jumpsuit and a concrete cell, Brad folded like a cheap piece of paper. His attorney called Jim on a Friday afternoon, begging for a plea deal that would keep Brad out of prison. "We'll consider a plea agreement under one condition," Jim told his lawyer coldly over speakerphone. "Your client pays back the entire $60,000 in full, covers every single cent of Mark's legal fees, signs a full confession, and does it all within 30 calendar days." If he misses the deadline by 1 minute, we push for maximum sentencing. To raise $60,000 plus another $15,000 in accrued legal fees in under 30 days, Brad had to sell every single thing he owned. His shiny leased BMW was immediately turned back into the dealership. His entire cryptocurrency portfolio was liquidated at a massive loss during a market dip, and he was forced to put his gold watches and high-end electronics up for quick cash sales on local classifieds. When all of that still left him $15,000 short of the target, he had to crawl on his hands and knees to his 71-year-old mother, Eleanor. Eleanor had to sign over an emergency high-interest reverse mortgage against her remaining pension and retirement savings just to keep her precious baby boy from getting shoved into a state prison cell. On the 29th day of the deadline, a certified cashier's check for $75,000 cleared into my corporate bank account. Every single red cent was returned, right down to the last penny. While Brad was selling off his life to stay out of a jumpsuit, our divorce proceedings hit the family court system 6 months later. Sarah showed up to the courthouse wearing a modest, dark dress, flanked by a high-priced local attorney she could barely afford, trying to play the delicate, victimized house spouse. She demanded half the equity in my paid-off house lifetime spousal support, 50% of my HVAC company's operating valuation, and for me to pay off her personal credit card debts. When the judge took his seat on the bench, my attorney Jim simply stood up, handed over the evidence binder, and played 3 key pieces of media on the courtroom screens. First, he played the 4K Nest video showing Sarah, Eleanor, and Brad standing by the gazebo, explicitly scheming to provoke a fight, make a false call to emergency services, and seize control of the residence through a fraudulent protective order. Second, he entered the certified bank records proving that Sarah had participated in corporate embezzlement to fund her brother's illegal debts while living rent-free in my home. Third, he submitted the original real estate purchase deeds proving the residence was bought strictly with non-marital inheritance funds long before the marriage began. The judge looked over his glasses, tapped the microphone, and delivered a ruling that was an absolute, undisputed massacre. He dismissed Sarah's demands for spousal support and alimony straight into the garbage disposal, ruled that the house and my business were my 100% sole personal property, and ordered her to pay her own legal fees out of her own pocket. To make the humiliation complete, the neighbor across the street, a retired guy named Bob who loved filming local neighborhood commotion, had captured Brad's screaming arrest on his phone from his front porch. Bob uploaded the entire unedited video to a local Columbus community Facebook group with the title, "High Society Barbecue Ends in Handcuffs." Overnight, Brad, Sarah, and Eleanor became viral legends across the entire county. The local art gallery where Sarah worked quietly let her go 3 weeks later to avoid the negative public relations blowback. A full year has passed since that wild, lemonade-soaked evening on my lawn, and my life has transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined back when I was keeping my mouth shut to keep the peace. My HVAC company is booming. We just closed on a lease for a second commercial warehouse on the north side of the city to handle our expanding commercial service contracts. I spent the winter completely gutting and remodeling my house from top to bottom. I threw out every last piece of delicate, fragile, useless art junk Sarah had put up over the years. I ripped out the dainty wallpaper, painted the walls clean, neutral tones, installed a deep leather sectional sofa, built a custom stone fireplace, and mounted an 85-inch television on the main living room wall where her pretentious gallery prints used to hang. And last month I took 2 full weeks off, packed my gear, and flew up to Alaska for a bucket-list salmon and deep-sea halibut fishing trip with my old high school buddies. Right now, as I'm sharing this story with you guys, it is a calm, cool Friday evening on my back patio. The lawn is fixed, green, and completely quiet. A thick, juicy prime ribeye steak is sizzling away on the grill, sending a trail of mesquite smoke up into the dusk sky. And I'm sitting back in a heavy cedar armchair holding a double tumbler of small batch bourbon over fresh ice. Sarah and her mother are currently living in a cramped, outdated 2-bedroom rental apartment in a noisy, rundown complex on the far edge of town. Sarah is working retail at a local department store just to pay her basic bills, while Eleanor spends her days complaining about the thin walls and noisy neighbors. As for our hotshot Wall Street wolf Brad, he's grinding through double shifts at a third-party debt collection call center, sitting in a tiny carpeted cubicle, spending every dollar he makes just to pay off the high-interest loan he took out against his mother's pension. My neighbor next door, a great guy named Dave, leans his arms over our shared cedar fence, waves a hand and calls out, "Hey Mark, how are you holding up after all that wild family drama last year?" I take a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my cold bourbon, look up at the clear evening sky, smile from ear to ear and call back, "Never felt better in my entire life, Dave." Because cutting out toxic parasites, protecting your hard-earned home, and keeping your self-respect is the single greatest win a man can ever ask for. That's my story, fellas. Stand your ground. Never ignore the red flags, no matter how much you care about someone, and never ever let anyone turn you into a free ATM. If you enjoyed this story, drop a like, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below with your thoughts, and stay safe out there.